Welcome, everybody. Today, we are joined by Joseph Citro. He is a Vermont author and folklorist, occasionally referred to as the Bard of the Bizarre or the Ghost Master in general. He has extensively researched and documented the folklore, hauntings, ghost stories, and paranormal activity and occult happenings in New England. So welcome, Joe, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. Nice to be with you. That's Ghostmaster General, if you please.
I feel like wizard should be somewhere.
Wizard also in addition.
Wizard of what? What could wizard go with? You should be wizard something.
Wizard of foolishness.
Wizard of the weird? I don't know.
Wizard of weird.
That'll do. That'll do. I'll go for that.
Oh my God. So Rena, just so you know, I've known Joe since I was in high school.
Oh wow.
Yep, he came to one of my English classes or video lit class because I didn't take English classes. Yeah.
Wait. I'm not going to dig into that right now. Go ahead.
And my teacher recommended or actually assigned the book Shadow Child, which is a horror book. And my memory of it is kind of foggy, but the one scene that really stuck out with me was someone was killed by the Gentry, I believe is the name. And this is me remembering it from high school. So if I screw it up, let me know. And the Gentry, and I remember somebody getting their head pulled back and them feeling themselves urinate on themselves while they were being killed. Is that correct?
I don't remember.
I was just about to ask that. You have such a large catalog. Do you remember what's in each of?
No, and as I get older, my random access memory is getting worse and worse. So someone will ask me questions that are just so obscure I don't even know the answers. And it's really not so much that I have a vast body of work, but I have a diminishing recall. I guess I can look that up for you, Jayson, if you want to recapture that scene. I don't remember the urinating part of it, but maybe. I mean,
yeah,
I might have written that. I wrote that a long time ago. That was published in 1986, I think, and I've gotten better since then.
Oh yeah, well, the weird thing was it had a picture of a clown on the cover then, which I don't remember there being a clown.
Well, that was part of my introduction into the whole world of publishing, and what a predatory group they are. The clown had nothing to do with my book. There was nothing in the book at all about a clown.
That was going to be my guess.
But you can put this together. Stephen King's book, It, was very popular at that time. I'm not sure if the first movie had been made by then or not, but clowns were in the horrific consciousness of everybody. So they just wanted to capitalize on that. It was a really sleazy thing to do. Had nothing to do with me, had nothing to do with Stephen King, had nothing to do with it or my book. And they put it on the cover. And I've been apologizing for it ever since. I was quite embarrassed by that. And that was my first published novel. So I wasn't off to a great start. Although the book sold tremendously. It sold about 100,000 copies.
Wow.
And it's still selling. A different publisher now, thank God.
Different cover.
And, did they take the clown off?
No more clowns. Yeah, they got rid of the clown. They exorcised it. But it's I don't know if I've got it handy or not.
Oh, I should have brought mine's packed away because we're moving, but I have a signed copy.
Yeah, well, no, I don't want to give that particular one any publicity.
Oh, right.
I'm trying to see if it's become something of a collector's item, I understand, but hang on.
Yeah, no problem.
Here's the way it looks now.
Okay, that looks more like it probably goes with the story.
And that picture's from a place in Vermont, right?
Yeah. there are a bunch of these around the state, these weird stone buildings. And this book is actually probably the final edition of this book. And it's a good way to, I can't really hold it up in such a way that it doesn't.
It looks good. I see it.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. But,
I'll throw a picture up when I edit it.
Okay. And it's illustrated. The cover and in the interior illustrations are all done by this wonderful Vermont artist named Corey Furman. And, just the work that the interior work he did on it was just beautiful. Oh. And the book is designed by a guy named Bill Cook, who works for various poetry presses. So this is a little bit out of the ordinary for him, but he did a beautiful job on the book. So it's the book that I've always wanted to have, but it's not the book that sold 100,000 copies either. So,
because that publisher knew that somebody was going to pick it up because of that clown, even though it had nothing to do with it. I bet. Right,
but it's deceptive because people wanted to read more about spooky clowns, and so I don't know. I don't know. Here it is, 30 years later, and I'm still pissed off about it.
Now, do they try to get you to write? Does like the I guess it'd be the publisher. Do they try to get you to write certain subjects? Like, hey, that was great. Now you got to write this, and you say no or yes, or do they?
Well, yeah, that happened. The book Shadow Child, the original publication of the book, it did very well. It sold about 100,000 copies. And so the editor I was working with wanted me to write a sequel. I didn't want to write a sequel because I don't like sequels. I mean, I wanted to write something else independent. So the compromise was that I would write another book in the same universe involving the same villain, but it would be a totally different story. And it was sort of sequel-like. But if you hadn't read Shadow Child, you could still read Guardian Angels and not realize that you were missing something, if that makes sense.
It does. I understand that.
And you've read them both, I think, Jayson, but you don't remember them.
No, I'm not terrible with the recall, but they do make the list of 7, 8, 9, 10, about 11 books that I've read. As far as novels go, I read a lot of nonfiction. But yeah, so I forgot to say, and Joe came to our English class. That's how I met him as a guest. I forgot to say that.
And then you were running a video store, and we kind of picked up interacting while you were at the video store.
Was that Video World or was it Showtime?
Hey, I'll forgive your bad memory if you'll forgive mine.
Because I worked at Video World, but then I owned Showtime. It was
I don't remember.
But he would come in and get horror movies. He had a horror movie night, and it was, and so it was great because I that's where I got to know him obviously a lot more.
Yeah.
It was a little bit like a celebrity coming in. By the way, when I remember the feeling when I was that age, going, it's Joe Citro. It was. Now you're just you're my friend now. It's much cooler now. I like it this way better. Then it was just I was in awe of a novelist that I don't even read. Then you moved from fiction to nonfiction, right?
Well, I really became disenchanted with the whole world of publishing and novel writing and fiction, and it just wasn't. I loved to write fiction, but I didn't like the business of fiction. I didn't like the big New York publishers, and I didn't like what was expected of me to get the books into the marketplace. There was a lot of unpleasantness and impoliteness and cutthroatedness, and it was an unpleasant place to be. So I just decided in 1994 that Deus Ex would be my last novel. And it was. In that same year, my first nonfiction book was published. So that was the year of change.
So was that a more pleasant experience to go from? doing nonfiction and then versus fiction?
Well, the other difference is that I went from a big publisher, like I was publishing with Warner Books, which was arguably the biggest publisher in the world at that time, to a little tiny publisher that was located in South Burlington, Vermont. So I went from a big publisher to a small publisher where I was much more comfortable. I had a wonderful editor named Barry Estabrook, and my first book with them, my first nonfiction book, if you will, was a collection of stories about Vermont, weird, unusual monsters and ghosts and things like that no other author had ever collected. So I collected those stories, and the publication was actually a joint publication between this tiny publisher called Chapters Publishing and Vermont Life magazine. Now, interestingly, neither of them exist anymore. They've both gone out of business. But Vermont Life magazine had a pretty good run, but years and years and years. But this little publisher got bought out by Houghton Mifflin, which is a bigger publisher, and I went with them for a while. But the point is, I was much smaller. A much smaller publisher was much more comfortable for me. Mm-hmm. So I like that more.
Yeah. So how did you get into this whole, like, the horror writing? And then there's also that saying of, like, writers write what you know, right? Like, are there elements of people or things or experiences in some of your fiction?
That's kind of a psychoanalytical question, and it's hard to explain, really. I always enjoyed strange things. I always enjoyed ghost stories and murder stories and monster stories and things like that. And even when I was a little boy, my father would drive me around and point out that place over there was a haunted house, and I saw a ghost up on that hill once, that kind of thing. And he had all these friends that these kind of elderly hill farmer types, and we would go on Sunday drives, and he'd stop in at their houses. We'd sit out on the piazza, as porches were called in those days, and I'd be bored silly listening to their talk until it turned to, like, murders. Then I'd sort of tune in, and the conversation would suddenly get more interesting. So by the time I was an adult, I had really collected a bunch of stories, all from my father. And I started reading similar stories and reading Vermont history and talking to other people with similar inclinations, like Jayson, and just pulling together a bunch of stories, which eventually appeared in this book called Green Mountain Ghosts, Ghouls, and Unsolved Mysteries. Maybe if I don't do I have one of those? Yes. That's it.
Oh, yes.
Nice. Now, the difference here between a big publisher and a small publisher was with the big publishers didn't care what they put on the cover of the book. They would just put whatever they wanted on, like a clown. But the small publisher was very considerate and polite about what they put on the cover. And I remember when they asked me about this cover, they said, well, would you mind if we put a gravestone on the cover of your book? And I said, no, I wouldn't mind. That's fine. And then they said, well, would you mind if we put your name on the gravestone? And I said, sure, yeah, I might as well start getting used to it. But that was kind of the difference between a big publisher and a small publisher. And I was much more comfortable with a small publisher. That's all.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
The whole story.
Yeah. Keeping it small is definitely more relaxing. Making films, I've never dealt with any, big film producer or anything as far as, like, my own movies, but doing it yourself is so much more, I don't know, rewarding.
Yeah. And you get creative control, right?
Yeah.
But you have to come up with your own definition of what's successful. Probably with a movie company or a big publisher, that's only measured by sales and bottom line. Mm-hmm. But if you're making your own films, or if I'm writing and publishing my own books, money is no longer the only measure of success, I think.
Yeah, it would be nice, but
yeah.
So, when you travel around Vermont, in one of the projects you were doing, or maybe many, you travel around Vermont and actually visit the places to write about them, or do you?
Right.
Like, is it the Eddy brothers? Is that?
Yeah. I've been there a few times.
Yeah.
Chittenden, Vermont. It's an interesting old house. It's still there. For those of you from California, you might not know the story of the Eddy brothers, but briefly, they were these two 19th century mediums during the heyday of American spiritualism. And they were conducting seances upstairs in this remote farmhouse in Chittenden, Vermont. And during these seances, which took place every night of the week except Sunday, they would somehow materialize three-dimensional phantoms. And the arresting thing about these phantoms is that sometimes they'd be recognized by people in the audience, people that came from all over the country to attend these seances. Sometimes the phantoms would dialogue from people in the group in foreign languages. There was this one story about a woman from Russia who had an extended dialogue with one of her deceased ancestors, all conducted in Russian. And when you stop to think that these Eddy brothers, these two mediums, really hadn't mastered the English language, it's absurd to believe that they had mastered half a dozen foreign languages. So it was quite mysterious exactly what was happening there. In 1874, I think it was, one of the big New York newspapers sent up a guy by the name of Henry Steele Alcott, who was charged with investigating and finding out how these phantoms were faked. And I think he was with them for about 9 weeks. And in that time, he was unable to determine that they were frauds. He determined that putting on such a show every night of the week, except Sunday, would require a whole troupe of actors and rooms full of costumes. And there was just no place to hide those in this farmhouse. So it became a real ongoing mystery. And I for a while, I was thinking, I've written about them a few times, chapters in various books. I was once given the assignment of looking into the historical documents and seeing if I could come up with how they were faking the seances. And I could impeach them a little bit, but I couldn't actually disprove them. So it remains a mystery. What the hell was happening in Chittenden? Wonderful story and worthy of being a novel, actually.
Where is that farmhouse? Because I want to go visit. It must be near me somewhere.
Well, it depends where you are, Jayson.
Williston.
Yeah, well, Chittenden is near Rutland, and people traveling to Chittenden had to take the train or the cars, as they call them, and into Rutland, and then go by carriage from Rutland to, I think it was about 10 miles by carriage. So it wasn't an easy trip.
Oh, okay. So it's not Chittenden County. Okay.
No, it's not even in Chittenden County.
It's Chittenden Town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a nice trip.
It's still
nice
around?
drive. Is what still around? The house is there.
Yeah, the house or like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people live there? Yeah, I don't.
Do people go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interestingly, and typical of Vermont, the house was bought up by a ski club from New Jersey. And now it's known as the High Life Ski Club. And I don't know how many members they have, but I've visited it since, ever since I've been writing about it. And they would let me in and show me around, and even offered to let me stay overnight there. Interestingly, though, my cohort, Robert Waldo Brunel Jr., his parents were going to buy that house at one point before the High Life Ski Club bought it. So he and they got to see the interior and learned a little bit about the history of the place. So Robert is a local artist, and he and I have teamed up to do a number of books, starting with one called The Vermont Ghost Experience. And we've done since then a few more, one called The Vermont Ghost Guide. And our newest effort is a comic book called Vermont Horror Comics, which may be right here. Here's the cover.
Oh, okay, cool.
Ooh, there it is.
Ah.
Yeah, I like the artwork.
So everything ghost and horror wise that you write in this vein, they're all based on stories, that people's accounts of things.
The stuff, even the novels were based on actual Vermont history and folklore. But when I quit writing novels, I realized that I had plenty of material to collect, and nobody had ever collected them before. So that's what I'm doing. I'm collecting real stories that are part of the Vermont folk tradition. Like there's a big lake here called Lake Champlain that separates, it's kind of bordered by New York State, Vermont, and part of Canada. Big lake, 120 miles long, I think. And supposedly there's a critter in the lake that people have been spotting for hundreds of years. And that is a story that fed one of my novels, and also has been, I've told that story repeatedly in different books from different points of view. So yeah, maybe there's a critter in the lake. When I was doing commentary on public radio, I was able to get hold of some echolocation that a local scientist had captured in the lake. And if you listen to it, it sounds like whales talking to each other, but of course there are no whales in the lake. So it begs the question, well, what was echolocating in the lake?
Right. Isn't it speculated it's a plesiosaur, I think? Is that the...
Well, there's a lot of speculation, and one is a plesiosaur, one is a zeuglodon, which is kind of a primitive whale. Also, big eels enter the picture. Apparently, different people report having seen giant eels in the lake.
And sturgeons.
Sturgeons will swim in a line, and they'll do something called porpoising, where they sort of partly, I'm trying to replicate it on the screen, they'll sort of partly show themselves, and they'll swim in a line so it looks like a long serpentine sort of critter. Sometimes it's just errant waves that just kind of, from a boat on the New York side, finally making its way to the Vermont side. So the explanations range from the mundane to the highly mysterious.
Yeah, my mom said she saw it once when I was little. My mom, she said she saw it when I was a little kid. Yeah, we were out near the Colchester Causeway, and yeah, she came running in and just screaming that she saw Champ. Champ is the name, by the way.
It's called Champ.
Yeah, which was our high school mascot, by the way.
And how did they depict your high school mascot if nobody really knows?
A big cartoon dinosaur. Like Barney, but green, I guess.
That's funny.
Yeah.
But not a sea creature.
Well, I guess it could have been our mascot. You know, you have to have 2 legs and walk around, so they modified it.
Oh, yeah, I guess that.
Rena, is there something there with you?
that was a perfect thing. That is Oliver Dennis, the cat, and he's quite a little critter himself. But yeah, he's like darting around like a maniac.
I think I saw something dart behind you, and I was worried for your safety.
You should have said no. No, I'm alone here. I have no animals.
Yeah.
Well, if you see anything behind me, let me know.
God. Oh my God.
So what do you say to people that are skeptics? You know, they're like, some people are really into this stuff and other people are like, I don't believe this at all. It's not real. And it sounds like you've seen enough and heard enough that maybe there's something to it. Where do you stand?
Well, I'm pretty skeptical, as Jayson knows. I'm much more interested in the stories than I am in whether they're true or not. I do like to look for explanations. I like to investigate and see if I can figure out what's actually happening, or parse the natural from the supernatural. I don't deny that weird stuff happens. It just doesn't very frequently happen to me. And when I go out looking for it, I rarely, if ever, find it. But I like the stories. The stories is always what has motivated me. The stories have been real motivators for me, and I think they're part of the fabric of what holds us together as a tribe, as a people. I mean, if you try telling some people that there's no critter in Lake Champlain, they'll get angry at you. It's this belief in it that unites some of us. I mean, it's sort of I won't go so far as to say it's cult-like, because it isn't, but it's a shared belief that seems to unite people in some way. So I think the stories are important. I think they're sort of the mortar of what holds the building blocks of our history together. And so I think they're important, and not everyone does. Not everyone thinks they're important, but I think they're important. So, yeah. But I don't argue with skeptics for the most part. I encourage skepticism. In fact, when I go into the schools, I like to tell the scary stories, but I also like to offer stories that have a solution and get the students to think about why this or that might have happened. Like one of my favorite questions, I'll ask kids, well, what's a ghost? And kids, particularly little middle schoolers, invariably will say, well, there are dead people who come back, or something like that. And I'll say, well, just suppose they're not the spirits of the dead. If they're not spirits of the dead, what else could they be? And that will usually freeze the discussion for a moment, and then encourage a lot of discussion about what else could cause those ghost sightings. It's fun. I really like working with middle schoolers a lot, because they're up for anything,
Yeah, my brain's kind of going now, like echoes from another dimension, aliens.
Yeah, I mean, it's because frankly, I don't think the dead return. And when we get into discussions like, well, okay, so why do ghosts have clothes on? I mean, do shirts have spirits? I mean, it's just, I'm not trying to convince them of anything. I'm just trying to get them to think about stuff. And
yeah, echoes from a parallel dimension from a different time actually, to me, makes more sense than spirit, because then they would. That's
explaining one unknown with another unknown. I mean, where's the parallel dimension you're talking about?
Well, for me, I think it's delusions myself. But I'm saying if I had to pick something else, I would have to go there first.
Yeah.
Aliens is actually before that.
Yeah, well, just the exercise of trying on these different solutions is fun. It's good for the mind, and it leads to leads to writing fiction. You can write fiction because that's the jump off place to a good story.
Oh yeah, I wrote a screenplay called The House that's about a ghost actually. And it's funny because people that know me go, "You're like the most skeptical person in the world. Why would you write stuff like that?" I'm like, "Well, I wish it were real. I like all that stuff. I find it beyond fascinating.
I want to believe." So
what a great exercise for kids, though, especially today, because I feel like they don't get that creative outlet, or like nobody sparks those flames. So that's really cool.
I'd probably get in trouble for introducing that manner of thinking these days in school.
Critical thinking.
I don't dare say that. Yeah, exactly.
So lacking now. I'm sure they're not getting that from TikTok.
Oh God. Now you had a experience that I remember you telling me about. Do you mind talking about the glass?
Oh no, I'll tell that story, and you know, because for a long time I didn't talk about it because it was so weird and I didn't have any explanation for it at all. I don't know quite where the story starts, but I was alone at my house in Burlington. And I knew I was alone. There was no question that I was by myself there. And I heard this high-pitched whining sound. Is this the story, Jayson? Is this the one where, yeah.
Yep.
I heard this high-pitched whining sound, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I thought maybe it was a smoke alarm, but I checked the smoke alarms. It wasn't that. And then I thought maybe it's a car alarm. So I got up and walked across the living room to the window so I could look out and see if there was a car with lights flashing and alarm blasting, but it wasn't that either. But walking across the dining room put me right beside the kitchen. And I could tell that the sound was coming from the kitchen. So I went in, and I was living alone, and I'm not particularly a good housekeeper, and I had a lot of dirty dishes on the sink counter, and I noticed that one of the glasses, a French tumbler, it was kind of a French tumbler, looks kind of like a jelly glass, was moving all by itself, and I couldn't figure out what was moving it. I thought, if the dishwasher were running, it might be vibrating and causing the glass to spin. And it was not only moving, but it started spinning. And it was spinning really fast. And it was the spinning glass that was producing a noise, apparently. So I just stared at it, probably with my mouth hanging open and just totally dumbfounded. And all of a sudden, as I'm staring at this glass, it just flew to pieces. It just exploded. And it kind of puts you in mind of those old Memorex commercials. Is it real or is it Memorex? Where they've got an opera singer singing to a wine glass until the wine glass explodes. Mm-hmm. It was like that. And it was somewhat frightening because it was only that one glass, although there was a lot of other things on the counter, and it flew. I mean, I was finding pieces of it for weeks afterwards. It just flew apart as if it I don't know, as if it just exploded, which is what it did. But the peculiar thing was it didn't leave like sharp shards of glass. The whole thing broke up into little squares of glass, about the size of your thumbnail, roughly. And I was finding them all over for a long time after that. And I couldn't figure out what had done it. Nothing like that ever happened before. I couldn't apply any sort of scientific method to it because to study something using the scientific method, it has to be repeatable. And it wasn't. It never was. And I had the comforting part of this story, I mean, it didn't frighten me to the degree I wanted to move out or anything. It just frightened me because I didn't have any explanation, and that's frightening. But my next door neighbor is a scientist, and I went over and told him about it, not knowing quite what to expect, other than that he had known me for a long time, and he knew I wasn't any kind of a bullshitter. And I told him what happened, and he came over and took a look around, and he just said, sometimes things happen and then they don't happen again, and so you can't study them. And that's the explanation that makes me most comfortable. I like that. So holding on to that one. And I tell that story, and I've never had anyone else who's experienced that. It's just a mystery.
That's really unique for sure.
I'll
be right back. Happened. That's the other weird thing. I mean, it didn't happen while I was in the living room. It happened while I was staring at it.
Oh, he'll be right back.
I thought he just found that too terrifying, I guess. The other interesting story happened here in this town where I live now in Vermont. It's a small town, very much like the one I grew up in. And back in the 1950s, there was a house here owned by a medical doctor and his family. And one day in October, it just started filling up with water. The flat surfaces, like the flat surface of the piano, was covered with water. The floor was covered with water. The carpets were soaked. Dishes in the kitchen cabinets were discovered to be full of water. And no one could determine where this water was coming from. And it went on for about a month, I guess. They had in all sorts of experts. They had the first person they called, of course, was a plumber. And he shut off all the water to the house, not just he shut it off from the street. So no water was even coming into the house, and it would still continue to fill glasses. And that the doctor talked about how he would walk from the kitchen to the living room with a bowl of grapes, and by the time he got to the living room, the bowl would have filled up with water right in front of his eyes.
Oh, wow!
Isn't that weird? I mean, it's not menacing in any way. It's just weird. It's menacing because it challenges our reliable reality. He had to move out of the house. He and the family moved. They got a trailer, as we used to call them, mobile homes now, and they put it in the front yard, and they moved into that. And whatever it was that was filling the house with water didn't follow them. I like to tell this story to the kids too, and I like to ask them, well, what do you think the name of the doctor was? And they'll never guess, of course, that his name was Dr. Waterman. So, I mean,
weird.
It's as if this cosmic joker, or whatever it is that causes this stuff, has sort of a sense of humor, and that's the punchline, Dr. Waterman. And it is a very, very weird story. My a friend of mine here in town, his father was the plumber who was called by Dr. Waterman to check the house. And apparently this plumber, was very religious, Roman Catholic sort of guy. And apparently what was happening in that house really troubled him for the rest of his life. Because he couldn't figure it out. Because he
couldn't figure out how to explain it.
He couldn't explain it. And he had he had to get a plumber's license. So he had to apprentice. He had to be a plumber for a long time. And he never encountered water behaving like that. So it troubled him. It actually troubled him. I guess it was somehow in conflict with his Roman Catholic upbringing. I don't understand quite how, but apparently it did. It just, I mean, if wine can turn into blood, then why not Well, anyway.
Water in the middle of a room. Yeah. I feel like I guess it would bother me not being able to explain it, but it wouldn't be troubling. It would just be like, I wish you could get to the bottom of this.
It'd be a persistent irritation. And there are stories, the cultural appetite right now is for demons and horrific encounters that make great horror movies. But, and that's fun. That's sort of recreational. But the stuff that happens usually isn't that malignant. The stuff that happens is usually pretty subtle, but troubling. And I think both of those are, my glass story and the water story are both examples of how things can be, kind of subtly troubling, but not really menacing.
Did you guys start talking about politics?
We haven't yet.
No, that's not so subtle and very menacing.
Demons in horrific situations that are not malignant.
Yeah.
Oh my God. But I know what you mean. I've even had, I have stories things that have happened to me that just you can't explain, and it's just the most bizarre thing, and not really menacing, but again, just like, what the hell was that? And there's no way to explain it.
What happened?
So when I was young, and in high school and college and stuff, there were these abandoned mental hospitals in my town where I grew up, and of course, what did all the young people do? Let's go in the old mental hospital. And they were condemned, but you could still find a way to get into them. And so that is what we did. And the bizarre thing about them was that they just closed them, but they left everything, including patient records and all the equipment. Yeah, so nobody decided to just remove that stuff. So we would go in and read patient records and look at their Christmas cards and decorations. And if you look up the place, it was called Rosewood, and there's definitely some troubling history behind it, and people were mistreated. And so who knows?
Where is it?
In Maryland, in Reisterstown, Maryland. And now they've since torn them all down, which was very sad for us because we just liked knowing that it was there. But yeah, I would go in with people, and sometimes bizarre things would then happen. Sometimes they'd happen there, and sometimes they would happen at my house, after. So, and it's weird because nothing really happened to me when I go by myself or other people, but I had this one ex that the bizarre just seemed to be attracted to him. So he went in there, and he comes back to the house, and then for days, just unexplained, the doors popping open, the front door, even when it's locked, and just things are moving, and the animals. I had a cat and a rabbit at the time, and they're behaving very strangely. The rabbit's stomping his foot and looking up like he's looking at something, and he's afraid. That cat's hiding in a way that she never would hide, just like when a repairman or something comes, she would hide, but not alone, and you have to coax her out. And then one day I went to the bathroom, so it was in the middle of summer, and you could put your hand like this right over the toilet, and it was ice cold, and then you could pull your hand and it was fine, and there were no fans, no air conditioning, there was no explanation for why is there a cold spot right over my toilet. And it freaks you out, because I'm I'm not sitting there, what, is there some kind of entity, and why on my toilet, what? So many questions.
Wow.
But yeah, it's just bizarre in a way that you're I'll never be able to explain that. I have no idea. All I know is that it happened. I definitely know that it happened, but I don't know what the heck it was.
Did you bring anything home with you from the hospital?
That was my guess. And then and then the ex did that thing that people always do, where they're you're not welcome here, you need to move on, and that classic trope.
Well, he might mean
and
like
then,
an inanimate object, like something you found there.
Like a case file or a electroshock machine or
not I know of, because I was always like, oh, this stuff has bad energy. Let's not take this out of here. But who knows? Maybe he had something and I didn't know about it. And that was the problem.
Well, wow. That is a curious story. And what made it stop, or what did it just kind of peter out after a while? Or
I thought that it just got lost. I was like, maybe it just got lost or got bored with us, so it moved on. But he said he did that whole like, you need to move on and all of that, and then it just stopped. But I just and I'm a skeptic too, so I'm not going to be somebody that's like, oh yeah, there's definitely a ghost or that, but it does bother you in that like something definitely happens and I can't explain it.
Yeah,
and I have no idea how to.
I would be very slow to leap to the conclusion that it was a ghost, but that's the first place people go. I think there must be some other way of looking at it. I don't know what, but I'm just thinking. I'm glad you remain open-minded about what might have caused it.
Yeah, I mean, I would be open to anything.
I have never had anything unexplained happen to me that I didn't at least go, I don't know what that was, but I'm sure it was something. Like I disregard things very, very, very easily. The most that's ever happened to me is when I was in Florida. I saw one of those triangle things in the sky, and it wasn't a kite. And then it wasn't there. Yeah. That's it though. But
that's it. You were abducted.
That's right. And I lost an hour, but whatever, that happens.
That's why you have no memory.
That's right. They took my memory part of my brain. But it's interesting that you said about the mental hospital abandoned, because I filmed a movie called Cthulhu Chronicles, and we filmed it in the Brandon abandoned mental hospital, and they left everything there. There were like wheelchairs and gurneys, and it was like so bizarre.
Yeah. What are you going to do with that stuff, though? Really? I mean, cart it away and throw it in a landfill? Or,
yes.
Wait, are you talking about the place that had been the tuberculosis sanatorium?
I don't know what I had heard mental hospital, but it could have been just the hospital, I suppose. But we found like a doll, and I mean, it couldn't get creepier. But
yeah, the dolls are creepy.
Yeah.
Not as creepy as clowns, but
no, clowns sell books. Hey, and publishers are kind of like clowns, but no. Sorry, I had to go and check on Luke. That's where I went.
No, we carried on. We thought we had said something that frightened you or offended you.
Yeah, I'm out of here. I get frightened very easily and offended. One of the things I don't know about you, or I do and I forgot, but are you from Vermont, like originally?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Like what generation?
I just real quick, I was born in the hospital in Rutland. And then when my parents took me home, they were living in Ludlow, and they were renting an apartment from a 74-year-old woman named Ida Fuller, who became in time like my third grandmother. And the interesting thing about her was that she was always Miss Fuller. She had never married, very independent old Vermonter type. She had been a teacher and a legal secretary. She'd gone to school with Calvin Coolidge. But the frosting on the cake was that she was the first person in the United States to collect Social Security. She had
the first person in the whole U.S.?
In the whole U.S., yeah.
Wow.
Ida Fuller. And she was very principled. And I tell this story because she kind of formed my opinion of what a Vermonter is really like, because she was kind of an independent single woman, no children, no husband, living alone except for the apartment that supplemented the Social Security income. And she Do you remember, maybe you're not old enough to remember that there was this TV show called I've Got a Secret with this guy named Gary Moore. And the whole purpose of the show was that people would go on with secrets and there'd be a panel of people who would try to guess what the secret was. It was kind of fun. But they tried to get her to go on the show. And I could follow this because she did not have a telephone and we did. So this whole thing was conducted on our telephone. And she had agreed to go on the show, and with her secret being that she was the first person to ever collect social security. And then she found out that the show was sponsored by a cigarette company, a tobacco company. And she's like, nope, don't want to have anything to do with that.
Wow.
She didn't do it. She didn't do it because she didn't believe in tobacco.
That is a very Vermont thing, actually.
Oh God, it's perfect. It's perfect.
It is. Yeah. We fight big companies coming in, and it's very really.
And she was right. I mean, the history has shown that she was exactly right about that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's a tough one. I'm not sure how good I would be at that. If I had, I mean, it depends on how much I believed in whatever. I mean, I still don't shop at Walmart.
Well, I don't either. I haven't set foot in Walmart in years.
Yeah, me either. They're terrible. But I do Amazon, so what's kind of a hypocrite there. Sorry, Rena, what?
Yeah, I said I haven't either, but it's funny that Walmart came up again. This is the second time.
Yeah, well,
talked about not shopping at Walmart.
If you start talking about menacing things, Walmart comes up eventually.
Yeah, we don't know half the evils of the marketplace. Walmart's a good title, but it certainly doesn't end there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. Now, Joe and I are Facebook friends, and you can bow out if you'd like. I just wanted to know, do you hold back when you're talking about politics, or do you, or like, do you edit yourself at all? Because you're pretty awesome with what you say, and I always wonder, is he holding back? Because if you are,
I'm always tempted to be a bit more bombastic, but I sometimes I sort of know better. Like I know when I make political posts, like most of my Facebook friends are going to feel exactly the same way I do. Mm. And I know when I make posts, it's not going to convince anybody who doesn't think the way I do. So in a sense, I know better, but sometimes I just get so furious about something that I just have to kind of vent on Facebook. And, my Facebook friends will pat me on the back and say, it's okay, Joe, you can settle down now. But yeah, I mean, I try to be somewhat creative about it. Like I don't write things like, Trump is a filthy rotter and anyone who doesn't believe that can unfriend me right now. I try to be a little bit more clever than that, but even though that's what I want to say. But yeah.
Yeah,
at least
I agree.
But you see my posts enough to know that the political posts are only occasional. And I try to do them just on Sundays, really. But it's usually the fucking Christians that piss me off most of all.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of another story.
Oh, nice.
Jesus.
Speaking of Jesus.
Yes, back in the beginning of my writing career, I think my first book had come out and it was getting some pretty good attention and it was selling a lot of copies, and I was getting called up to do interviews and speaking gigs and things like that. And I was a little bit full of myself and this, I'm thinking, hey, this is working out okay. And in a minute, I just lost you. And so I got invited to come down to Claremont, New Hampshire and talk at the library. So I was giving one of my spiels about something or other. And then at the end, there was a Q&A section. So somebody asked the inevitable question, you write about all this scary stuff. What really scares you? And without giving it any thought at all, I just shot back, Christians.
Oh man.
New Hampshire.
Then I knew immediately that I needed to, install some self-censoring stuff. And then there's this one guy in the way back. And then a bunch of people started clapping, and then a bunch of people started laughing. And I said, I got away with it this time, but I'll never do it again.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
What is so scary?
Sorry, Jayson.
What made you say that immediately? What is so scary?
I find Christians terrifying. And it's worse now. I mean, that was back in the late 80s. And I guess I don't mean all Christians. I mean the militant ones that want to tell us how to think and behave and dress in a certain way, and that easily forgive violence if it isn't consistent with their ways of thinking, and want to control women's bodies and want to control everybody's thoughts. And I don't like them. I think religion in general has just done a whole lot more bad than good. So I probably shouldn't even be saying that on this podcast, but
we're fine. We talk about anything, but
yeah. Well, let's hope you don't lose any viewers.
This can only gain. It can only go up.
I've been sort of a self-disclosing sort of mood.
Yeah, well,
that's all good. I got to disclose. So.
I don't know. Christians. I did a post not long ago on Facebook about Christians and how much I thought that it was actually a negative in society. And of course, my ex-in-laws, they're all Catholics, which is, in my opinion, the worst Christians. But they're just Catholic, so they're not like, they don't do anything to anybody. They just practice it or whatever. I find it so amazing that I can make it a statement like Christianity has been responsible for so much violence and death throughout time, and then they can come back at me and say things like, no, Christianity, those are just not real Christians that are doing that. And I'm just like, what? Wait, if you say you're a Christian and you're practicing Christianity and you do violence, that makes them not Christians suddenly? Well, okay, but they're doing it in the name. What if they say they're doing it in the name of their religion? Now are they still Christians? And like, it seems kind of ridiculous to be able to just, they did something that considered bad, so now we're just going to call them not Christians. But it's the religion that's pushing them in that way. So it is that, just because someone doesn't mean that.
I've heard that too, Jayson, like from several people that I know, that there are definitely people that I know and respect that call themselves Christians, and will say like that same thing, that like people doing these violent things are not real Christians. And there's definitely that sentiment, like there's that authoritarian right, and like in those type of Christians that I think those are the people that scare you, right? And like rightfully so, I think, because they want to impose their will and fascism on everybody. But it is interesting to think about, but I think the thing about that religion is like there's so many different ways of interpreting it and practicing it, right? Like, so you can see why, like, maybe one might go one way, and one might go another way. And like in the Bible is a piece of literature, I mean, in my opinion, right? And so you bring into it some of your life experience and how you interpret any piece of literature, right? Like two people might read your book, one of your books, Joe, and have very different takeaways. And so that's sort of how I see that whole like real Christian, not real Christian. I think it's just different interpretations of a text or a practice, and some are totally fine and innocuous, and others are not so great.
Well, I guess the people I worry about are those that want to knock down the wall between church and state. It has nothing to do with how they might interpret the 23rd Psalm. It has to do with taking the wall down, making. I'm hoping somebody else will pick that up. That's maybe. Yeah. Who? Sorry. I'm worried about the people that think Trump was sent by God to deliver us. And I'm worried about Christians in the sense that Christian thinking can develop that sort of mania. And I don't think it's reserved to just Christianity. I think it's other religions as well. It's the cultism within the religious thought. And it's always interesting for me in the work that I do to try to figure out how people can adamantly not believe in ghosts and not believe in supernatural experiences when they do, in fact, believe in supernatural experiences. They believe that there's a God and there's a Jesus, and that the wine changes to blood and the bread changes to flesh. I had trouble with that even as a little kid. And I was Catholic too. Were you Catholic, Jayson?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember so much of that was just tediously irrational to me, even as a little kid. And for example, well, if God built the universe in 6 days and on the seventh day he rested, well, how come he had to rest if he's all powerful? Why did he need to rest? I mean, those little simplistic thoughts started to intrude on my ability to be a religious thinker. But still, so sometimes I think I just displaced all this early religious upbringing with my interest in supernatural and ghost stories and UFOs and monsters and serial killers and all that fun stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. There's this, this is me in Catholic school on Saturday.
Yeah, exactly.
What, Jayson? That doesn't make any sense. If he already knew what was going to happen, why would he let something happen and then wait and then implement something to stop what he started and then criticize the humanity for something he allowed to have happen, but he knew the whole time? and like is he crazy or is he sadistic? Like, what is going on there? Is he playing games with himself? Like,
I feel like a lot of the stories.
It's really hard for a little kid.
There's this this great meme that I am trying to find that I absolutely adore. And it sums up what I have tried to explain to people that confuses me. And it does it better than I ever could. And of course, I got 70 comments underneath it.
you can find it and post it in this interview.
Yeah, I will definitely do that.
Put it up there.
Yeah, I will. But yeah, it's the whole thing about being all knowing, being all loving, and being all seeing, and then implementing things along the way. It's just like, it doesn't make sense. And of course they go, well, of course it works. He works in mysterious ways. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not for you to know.
That's right, exactly. But okay, sorry. It's hard to not talk about that once it gets brought up. So I do things like that. So now I know you're a film fan, and I wanted to get also, I would probably end up being a watch list for myself. But could you tell me what your 3 favorite horror movies are? I said 5 originally, but I was like, I'll go 3. If you have one.
I like the original Night of the Demon, Curse of the Demon. I'm not sure if that's ever been remade. God, I hope not. But it's I like The Haunting of Hill House. The call simply The Haunting, the 1961 version, not the remake, which is idiotic. I like Lady in White, Frank LaLoge's film. It's a beautiful, beautiful ghost story. Takes place in a upstate New York town, and it involves a blue-collar Italian family that reminds me a lot of my own family. It's a beautiful film, and if you've never seen it, it's time you corrected that. Lady in White. That's 3, I guess.
Are there any that have come out more recently? Anything that you would like or recommend?
More recent ones. I like very much a film called It Follows.
Okay, what are 3 of the worst horror movies?
I've never seen them.
You haven't?
So how do you know if something's good then? Or if it's going to be good, right? If you don't watch the bad ones.
Well, I can't say
bad ones.
I can't say I don't watch bad ones. I just don't know the worst. I don't think I've ever sunk that low. I know some are really god awful, and I might, if I happen to find myself in the presence of one, I might watch, 10 minutes of it or something. But I'm too old to watch bad movies. I don't have life hours to invest in those. So, no, I can't think of any bad ones.
Well, what were some of the writers that you read when you were younger?
Steinbeck.
Okay.
Lovecraft.
Oh yeah.
Conan Doyle. Those would probably be the 3 alchemical ones that eventually caused me to get into writing. I know on my Wikipedia, I don't know who wrote my Wikipedia page, and I don't know why I even have a Wikipedia page, but they say that Poe was a big influence, and he really wasn't. And I have occasionally confessed publicly, much to the chagrin of my friend Tony Magistrale, that I never really liked Poe. I couldn't read his stuff, so it just didn't resonate with me, so I didn't read it. So he was not one of my big influences. But I think when people write scary stuff, you just kind of infer that they must have read Poe.
Well, Lovecraft and Poe are incredibly different.
Yeah.
I love Lovecraft, but I haven't read a lot of his stuff, obviously. But I have read a lot of stuff about the stories because I've been into. Well, I made a film called Cthulhu Chronicles, and I studied a lot about like all the lore around Cthulhu.
Is that film available? I don't know if I've seen that.
It's on YouTube. Yep, I can send you a link. I did it in 2005 on a no budget at all, just whatever I'd make during the week, I would put into it, and we filmed at the Brandon abandoned hospital, and I'll send it to you. It's not good you'll hate it. But
put the link in the chat in the video.
In the video, I will.
For people to watch it.
So the next time someone asks me, name your worst.
That's right.
It's gonna be Jason's.
I thought you might say it. Actually, I'm like, please don't say Cthulhu Chronicles, please.
Yeah, no, I don't like to name worse things. Because one of the things when early in my career I was reviewing books for some different magazines, and I stopped doing that because what I realized was that if a writer is earnest about what he or she is doing, it takes as much work to write a bad book as it does a really good book. And I just didn't want to be the one to say, this really sucks, because someone else might read it and like it. So I just stopped reviewing books. I think reviewing is an irrelevant occupation for the most part.
Yeah, I feel that way about indie films and indie books, but if a big company like Fox makes a terrible movie, I have no problem, because they have a budget. They should be doing better.
Yeah. And
no
you must
excuse.
have a pretty long list of terrible movies then.
God, my God. I had like 15 years in a video store. I've seen some and the movie theater before that for like 10 years. So I've seen so many bad movies and some good movies that I would have never seen if I didn't work there.
Yeah. Well, I'm always on the hunt for little known but very good movies, and that's why podcasts like this one might identify some of those lesser known but really, really good small films.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I remember I messaged you about, is it called Troll Hunter?
Yeah.
I had never. Like that. I liked it too. I was so surprised, and it was so well done, and it was so low budget, and it was just it was great. I thoroughly enjoyed it, the whole thing, and it was what language is it in? Finnish, maybe.
Maybe it was. I remember it as being Finnish.
Well, I wanted to see how was COVID? Did that affect your work at all during it? It's still happening, but
it affected it a lot. For 2 years, I haven't really been able to go out and do readings, or I had to stop my own interviewing because I was, typically I'd be traveling around Vermont, tracking down some of these stories. I got a list of stories that I want to, some of them look potentially fascinating, but I need to go out and interview the people and visit the sites. And I haven't really been able to feel that I can do that safely. I've had to turn down many offers for to do readings. And just yesterday, I spoke to somebody from up in Montgomery Center who wanted me to come up there and do a reading, and to try to encourage the audience to tell local ghost stories. And I love to do that. That's a really fun community exercise, and people will tell local stories, and I'll collect those. So it's a great thing to do. And I really wanted to do it, but there's just no way I can do that. I'm still avoiding crowds, and I
could also always do it like this.
You could not with some of these old coots.
Oh, I guess so. Yeah.
No, you just can't do it. You can't. Right. You can't go through the houses and explore the graveyards. It just doesn't work. So what I did was I'm trying to get some of my books that have gone out of print back into print. So I've been working on that. I can do that in my home. And I've also been getting really retrospective. So I wrote a memoir during the pandemic. That was my pandemic project because I really couldn't get out and mingle with people. So I went inward and kind of visited my own history and came up with this little memoir. That's me as a kid.
Oh, you can see my destiny. Picture.
My destiny was already imprinted. So,
that's
what I've been up to for the last 2 years.
Oh wow, okay. And we're like not getting out of this COVID thing right now at all. Like a lot of people have kind of just gone, it doesn't exist anymore. But like there's more variants now. Again.
Yeah, it's morphing, and I'm fearful of it. I don't want to get it. I don't want my last days to be spent, coughing and on a ventilator and in a hospital bed. So I'm perhaps more cautious than I need to be, but I'm very cautious. How is it out where you are, Rena? Is it really everywhere?
Sometimes they put out the numbers and sometimes they don't. Like it seems to come in waves. But because so many things are outside here, you can largely avoid being in really close quarters with people and like wear masking and public transportation and tight spaces. So it's been okay. But we were fortunate because they had all the outdoor dining stuff, and now they've permanently kept things outside for places that didn't even have outside stuff. And so I think, being here definitely been luckier than people in other spaces, because you can hike, you can just walk around, you can do outdoor stuff a lot easier.
Yeah. Well, here it's still somewhat dangerous, but not as dangerous as New Hampshire. So glad to be on this side of the river.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to ask you before I forget. I have a question I'm excited to ask you. That I like to ask people. It helps me. I usually can guess what the person's going to say, but I'll try not to guess this. It's a crazy kind of wacky question, and it's a hypothetical, and it's kind of fantastic. So put your thinking cap on. Okay, so you are sitting where you are right now, okay, and through the door bursts someone that looks exactly like you, except wearing the same clothes and everything, except they're a little dirty, they're a little disheveled, they've got a rip in their shirt, maybe a little blood coming down. It keeps changing.
You added the blood.
I add things. It's my writer in me that can't write. And they say, "I'm from the future, come with me." What do you do?
Well, I tell them I'm armed.
Are you right now?
Yeah.
Well, Aaron, he says, "I know, but you have to come with me."
Well, it sounds like the beginning of a story that I probably would never write. I would probably tell him that I'm already moving into the future, but at my own pace. So get out of here.
At my own pace. The cat is trying to dismantle the air conditioner, which is amusing. So, yeah.
There's an unexplained thing.
Yeah.
It's been really fun seeing your cat moving around in the background. Like you're pretty much oblivious to it, but it's quite startling because it looks like kind of a moving shadow every now and then, just kind of sneaking behind you.
Dun, 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 dun,
kind of funny. Dun. Well, thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
Thank you, Joe. It was great meeting you. And,
well, thank you. You too.